We're streeting, and I'll say bluntly, I'm not a Labour supporter, but I like Wes Streeting. This week, just a couple of days ago, on the 20th of June, Parliament crossed an historic threshold. The assisted dying bill, after decades of moral and political wrangling, passed its third reading in the House of Commons by a slim margin of 23 votes. For some, it was a triumph of dignity and autonomy. For others, a dangerous step towards institutionalised abandonment. I put my cards firmly on the table here. I've said so a few times. I'm not in favour of assisted dying, but I am cautiously in favour of this bill, partly because I think for the first time it's acknowledged that the arrest of people, of relatives who help their loved ones to go to places like Dignitas in Switzerland, this is something that needed to be stopped long ago. Those arrests tend not to result in a prosecution, but the level of stress that is imposed by the state is utterly wrong. For my part, that's as far as I would have gone in an assisted dying bill. Where Streeting has gone much further in opposing this bill than I would have done. Once sympathetic to legalising assisted dying, he's now emerged as its most prominent cabinet-level critic, arguing not merely from faith or sentiment, but from policy, practicality and principle, and I think he has a very good case. Streeting's opposition is rooted in two key arguments. First, the lack of financial and structural readiness, and second, the moral risks for society's most vulnerable. There isn't a budget for this, he says. Setting up this service will take time and money that's in short supply. It is, in his view, a matter of political triage. Politics is about prioritising. It's a daily series of choices and trade-offs, and I fear we've made the wrong one. Well, there's a lot of the NHS which is wrong, and there's a lot of the NHS that needs to be improved. And one of the other improvements would be to strip the NHS of a lot of its bureaucrats. One cannot miss the irony. A government presiding over NHS waiting lists and workforce burnout is now expected to design, to train, to regulate a nationwide assisted dying regime. The costs are not trivial. Training, regulation, drugs oversight, legal oversight, all amounting to an estimated £425 million in a decade, and meanwhile palliative care remains underfunded, uneven, and in parts of Britain disgracefully unavailable. I fear that this assisted dying bill will lead not so much to more, it will certainly lead to less relatives being dragged through police stations, but it may well lead to more nurses like Lucy Letby suddenly caught up in a nightmare of charges and recriminations and unable to resist. I was chatting yesterday with someone who was saying that the Lucy Letby defence was extraordinary, and it was predicated simply on the idea that the expert witness testimony brought in by the prosecution should be ridiculed and challenged. Well, perhaps not enough. And I'm left with the feeling that there's something deeply wrong about the Lucy Letby case, but I don't know what that is. I do know that the NHS and that NHS bureaucrats fiddle around with the paperwork. And so you think something is wrong with the paperwork? Well, the answer is yes, it is. And I've now seen evidence of paperwork that has been modified, and that paperwork itself has been presented to judges and to courts. Now, whether that is perjury or not, the demands of the bar for claiming perjury is quite high, but nevertheless, this is dodgy, and this is NHS bureaucracy. I don't think one can miss the irony here in the assisted dying bill. A government presiding over NHS waiting lists and workforce burnout is now expected to design, train and regulate a nationwide assisted dying regime, and the costs are not going to be trivial. Training, regulation, drugs, oversight, all amounting to an estimated £425 million in a decade. Meanwhile, palliative care remains underfunded, uneven, and in parts of Britain disgracefully unavailable. Streeting, a Christian, quoted Gordon Brown to powerful effect. There's no effective freedom to choose if the alternative option, high-quality end-of-life care, is not available. What appears to be a choice may in fact be coercion cloaked in compassion, and indeed this is the moral edge of Streeting's criticism. He aligns with medical colleges, including the Royal College of Psychiatrists and the Association for Palliative Medicine, who fear that vulnerable patients might feel obliged to relieve the burden on their carers or families, and in a society still marked by inequality, such decisions are never made in a vacuum. Streeting's stance places him at odds not only with the Prime Minister who voted in favour, but with the tide of public opinion and the parliamentary majority. Keir Starmer reportedly rebuked him for speaking out. This was a free vote. Keir Starmer should shut up. The official cabinet line was supposed to be neutrality. So I don't understand why Keir Starmer should have any problems with Wes Streeting speaking out. It's only at the last minute that Keir Starmer decided to vote publicly anyway. Neutrality is a myth when the NHS is so implicated so directly. Under the bill, it's the NHS, already in Streeting's words, in a fight for its life, that must implement the procedures, carry the costs, and oversee the process. And assisted dying is no longer a theoretical right, it's a logistical demand on a health system that is barely standing. And there is the moral awkwardness of the savings argument. Some analysts have suggested that despite set-up costs, the government may save over £600 million in the long term because of shorter hospital stays. Streeting refuses to accept that logic. It feels uncomfortable talking about savings in this context, he says, and rightly so. When a government begins calculating cost savings from death, one must ask why philosophy of life is being smuggled in under the cover of fiscal efficiency. The bill, as drafted by Kim Ledbetter, is flawed. It drops the requirement of High Court judges to approve assisted deaths. It leaves crucial safeguarding provisions vague or delegated. It accelerates rather than deliberates. Streeting is not alone in fearing its implications. The Labour MP McDonough calls it a Trojan horse that could break the NHS. Others speak of panels with insufficient training, of disabled people fearing that they will be next, of a culture shift that valorises death as a solution. It's not anti-progress to insist that legislation must be accompanied by caution. Streeting's warning is not reactionary, it is responsible. Streeting's critics call him an obstacle to progress, but sometimes progress gallops towards a cliff. To pause, to question, to raise the alarm, this too is leadership, and his dissent, though unpopular, is principled. He's reminded Parliament that compassion, like justice, must be informed, not just felt, that care is not just what we offer at the end of life, but how we value the lives most likely to be left behind. And the assisted dying bill may well become law, but it will do so over the concerns of a health secretary who has chosen conscience over convenience, and in a political culture starved of integrity, that alone deserves recognition.